name is Srđan Pladanović, and I will be the moderator at this panel. I wish you all, again, a very warm welcome, and I hope that we will have a productive panel. So the name is AI and Society. And first of all, you know the rules. So you have 12 minutes for presentation. I will warn you 2 minutes before your presentation ends. Also, another important information, after this panel, there will be lunch served here. So please join us. And without further ado, I will introduce our first panelist, our first speaker. So we have a presentation by 3 authors, Miloš Jovanović, Sandro Radovanović, and Boris Delibašić. They come from the Faculty of Organizational Sciences, University of Belgrade. And the title is Misalignment of Fairness in Machine Learning. So please, Miloš, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity and also the pleasure to start off this panel session. So I'll be talking about misalignment of fairness. We mainly do we research the machine learning from the technical side, but we have to solve for problems which are mostly sociological, like fairness. We'll see what issues we have with that. So, this work? Okay. So when we create machine learning models, we use historical data of some decisions and try to build up models that automate some decisions. Those decisions can influence people, like decisions on whether to put forward someone on their job application or to allow someone a credit because they're assessed as good for credit rating. And when we judge these models, we usually have some metric in mind, like accuracy. And we say, if we build accurate models, that will be good for the whole cause. But businesses sometimes don't care exactly about the accuracy of the model, but some down the line KPIs. So they like to have more profit or something else. And these two things are not always aligned, meaning what we aim for, like accuracy, and what they aim for something else. And this misalignment occurs very often in machine learning. And that's when you try to state your goals in terms of a certain metric, and then you optimize it, and once you get the results, you kind of realize it's not what you meant, but you have to redefine what you meant. And these misalignments are sometimes benign because your optimizers are not so powerful. But once they are powerful, then those mismatches becomes even larger. And good examples are, for example, when you state you want accurate models, and the models try to make all errors as false positives, meaning always predict the way that kind of gives credit loans, for example, where they're not needed, then you don't like that kind of model, even if it's accurate. And typical example from YouTube is that they also define a metric for the success, and that's the total hours spent or number of views. And it's, as I said, benign until you're really good at optimizing that. And once you are, then you question, oh, is that what I wanted? Because it end up people spending all their days on YouTube. That's not what you want. So that's the main concern of the community for AI safety, because they say that even slight misalignments of our true goals to what we specify can end up being very tragic if AI eventually becomes superhuman. So that's a concern. So in case of what we're doing, it has to do with fairness, and the fairness goals are tricky to define. So we have well-known examples from systems like Compass, which kind of tries to rate and estimate the risk of people that are imprisoned. Will they reoffend after being released? And this system is built up to have an accurate kind of risk scoring, but it ends up kind of having more errors on the side of African Americans or colored people, and it makes more errors with them. So then we realize when we estimate these models, we see that they kind of okay. Can we have the next slide?
Jelena.
Okay. So yeah, we can see how the metrics go, and we see that much more mistakes are made on their side. So that we say this is unfair, but how we define what fair is in a more precise manner, we consult with the social science literature. And there's a lot of concepts being talked about, like equity, that's saying that all groups should have the same kind of access to the resources. But that doesn't turn out to be fair in a lot of things where, for example, when we want to allow someone credit, we want to be fair and equally distribute credit only for those people that are deserving in a sense. So the concept of merit comes in the distributive justice literature that kind of says, okay, two people that have an exact background, but come from different groups should be treated equally. Also, there's a concept of equality of opportunity, which says, okay, if you have like two CVs, two resumes, you want to have the same kind of probability of them succeeding, regardless of, for example, the race. So you strip out the photo, you strip out the name, but you still end up discriminating one group because there are a lot of telltale signs of the gender, for example, within the resume. If someone likes knitting, that's a kind of a giveaway. So then this still doesn't work, this kind of fairness through unawareness. So this disparate treatment concept says that you should not use these attributes of people when you make decisions, and that's actually legal in most of the countries, but you should also not make disparate impact on them, even if you are not using the exact the attributes. There's numerous examples, but the thing is, all of this is discussed in the social science literature in a kind of verbal way that gives a rationale, but not formal definitions that we need when we do machine learning. So for machine learning, we need to specify the goal mathematically in formulas, in metrics, and so we struggle. We interpret the social science literature. We want to equalize to be fair across different groups, not only one, right? And the data is usually against us because data contains examples which are biased, and also we don't have equal representation of every group in the data, and that creates issues. But the thing is, if we can have a good measure of what the fair means, then we can correct it. That's the main goal. But the thing is, how do we measure fairness precisely? So there are ways to measure fairness statistically. We say demographic parity is one way, is saying that two attributes or variables are, if they're uncorrelated, they're independent, that means that the probabilities have to match between groups. And that seems like reasonable. And it's easy to optimize. We can in our algorithms and it works well. But this ends up not being what we wanted because this equalizes outcomes. This is the equity part. So we want a more kind of robust way to do it. And there's metrics that capture, for example, equalizing odds is a metric that captures whether you, when you make decisions about someone, outcomes, you, for example, estimate their credit rating, that should not be related in any way to their gender, let's say. But only for those people who deserve credit, who are at the end kind of not defaulting. And that's hard to optimize. We have to optimize across a number of formulas. So people revert back to using just a simpler version of that. Equals opportunity is how statisticians actually interpret the social science literature, saying, okay, only for people that are qualified applicants, you need to have the same probability of them going through the job application. So that's, as I said, this is kind of interpretation of what social science is saying. Not only that, the bigger problem is that you always see in the literature this kind of paragraphs, and when they say we stated a goal, trying to state it as clear as possible, but then it's hard, non-convex and hard to solve for. So we revert back to some approximations of the goals that are proxies of fairness. So there's double time you have errors in what you optimize, and this is exactly the misalignment. That's the problem. And there are two reasons. One is this mathematical way. We introduce approximations, trying to solve these equations for fairness. And this is what we've been doing, trying to solve better in the last, let's say, 10 years, and what our group is doing a lot. But the other source of imprecision and misalignment comes from social scientists not being clear enough what fairness is and how to formulate it. And So I will talk briefly about our progress in doing the first thing and say how we're not making much progress in the second one. So I will skip, in interest of time, one of these and talk about adversarial learning. This is a way to formulate this unawareness in a better way. So unawareness means if I don't know your gender, I will not be biased. We saw that's not the case, but because I have some other attributes which correlate well with gender, for example. And there's a way to solve that, and that's to use my description of a person and then convert it, transform it to some new representation, which is good and successful in predicting the outcomes, but very unsuccessful in predicting the gender. So in that way, I build up a representation of a person which hides away or masks their gender throughout the whole, all the attributes we described them with. So that seems successful, and you don't require to have a metric of fairness because you know you masked out everything related to gender. You're clear. And we extended this. That was last year in trying to also introduce these weighting networks, which is a way to pick out examples which contribute to biases. We know that the data can contain biases. So we have this weighting network that picks out, says, okay, disregard some of the samples because they're introducing bias more than others. So this is like a technical way how to do it. How much time do I have?
2 minutes more.
2 minutes. Okay. So envy-free is also a new concept from sociology that comes with you try to distribute resources to groups. And you have users that get some amount of resources, but they can be unsatisfied with what they got. But if you satisfy this envy-free assumption, then actually none of those users will be willing to trade with another one for their resources. So if they're not satisfied, at least they're not envying anyone else. And this can be extended to fairness also. And we've done this fairness without envy. And we did a kind of extension that says, you will be using a model that determines whether you should be, you get a job, for example, or a credit. But the model that you used will always be better than any other model for any other group. So you don't want to have envy within. And that's kind of what fairness means. You're dissatisfied, but still not envious. But the question is this envy truly fairness or not? We don't know. But this is at least a notion that we can use. Also from reinforcement learning, there's when you train robots to solve mazes or to solve games like chess or something like that, we use these kind of reward functions that say, okay, after a certain sequence of actions, you will be getting a reward if you won in a game. And we extended that this year in trying to use this reinforced algorithm, a technical thing that kind of allows us to input a reward function, and we used a fairness metric. And we said, you can write any function of that's fairness function. That does not have to be mathematically nice. You don't have to be differentiable. You don't have to be anywhere approximation of a true function. You use any function you want, and you can optimize it. And we showed in some of the metrics for fairness, which are really hard to optimize in previous attempts, we were able to optimize them. But the question is, okay, now you can input whatever you want. However you define fairness, we can optimize it. There's a new tool. But question is, what's a good fairness metric? And this is what we don't know. So that's why this is our cry to actually social science people.
Please have in mind the time.
Okay, this is the last slide. So we kind of need them to express their views of fairness in a very clearly, let's say, mathematical terms, because once you're disambiguous and clear, we can test that, we can push it to the limits, optimize for that, and we can say, is that what you really wanted in the end? And if not, we can iterate and try to be precise in how we define what fair means. Thanks.
Thank you, Milos. So now we move on to our next presentation. So the title is Fill in, Accept, Submit, and Prove that you are not a robot, Ubiquity as the Power of the Algorithmic Bureaucracy. The presentation will be held by Michal Bukhtaryov and Anna Bukhtayrova from the Siberian Federal University.
Yes.
Can I use this?
Yeah.
It's a different one.
Hello.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Mine is working.
I think it's working. We are going to present together, so it's a kind of collaborative intelligence, you know, not artificial, natural, but still. And probably you see that our first slide, it's not a kind of traditional one. So you see that we explicitly show how it works.
And of course, these steps can be interchangeable. Yes, and this, you know, little check mark is something that we are all willing to have.
Well, we do not pass this test.
Okay, so this is the example of the very typical form that many of you, I think everybody would fill in, and this one particularly is from the Kenyan e-government website. But what is interesting is when you click terms and conditions, it would lead you to nowhere. It's what's going to be the 404 error. So it's very symbolic. I think it's not just to say something not nice about this particular website, but it's symbolic in a way that it shows how it's really, you know, is for many of us.
Well, and here is the quote. Actually, the main idea is the question: are we there yet? Is it the iron cage that really surrounds us now? We are in that rational society.
Are these specialists without spirit actually the algorithms?
And here are a number of concepts. Probably you've faced them. You read articles about algocracy or e-government, and maybe you even participated in some strategic sessions of your institutions where managers are talking about introducing digital tools, digital change to the organization. And yes, digital government and digital bureaucracy, well, all these concepts are different, but our particular interest is this one. Algorithmic bureaucracy. This concept was introduced not long ago. Actually, it was 2019, I believe, when a group of researchers decided to work with the British experience from Great Britain. And their particular interest is the local governments, local level of authorities who are actually dealing with complexity, the complexity on the local level. And they found out that there are three main characteristic features of algorithmic bureaucracy. They call it algorithmic bureaucracy. Well, new sources of data. And here is the trouble. Actually, this data is not from the governmental websites. It's usually Internet of Things, commercial services, social media, which are also non-governmental entities. And well, the data analysis techniques, which is basically the theory, and the availability of tools. They particularly mention open source tools and the tools for programming, like R language.
And this particular group of researchers, they were actually quite optimistic about algorithmic bureaucracy. They say that it has a huge potential to help local governments in decision making, in problem solving. So they were quite optimistic.
I wouldn't be so optimistic, at least because of this, the data collected from the sources. And my question is whether algorithmic bureaucracy can stay local in the world of cloud computing. Actually, we had a kind of experience in Russia when the government wanted to introduce some local initiatives 20 years ago, 15 years ago. They distributed servers and well, it was a project run by the World Bank for schools. And I was running around the educational district, installing the servers and so on. And finally, it turned out to be more productive to have software as a service, platform as a service, and one particular set of rules for everybody. So it turned out not to be local. It became national, and software as a service, it's even global. So we are quite skeptical about that. And what is even more dangerous in our picture of algorithmic bureaucracy is that it actually creates algorithmic citizen. It's not a user, it's not a customer, it's a citizen that has to accept, fill in, and submit.
Yes. So basically, we as users, we are getting used to do that routinely every day, many times. So my question is, do you remember the last time that you had when you had to click the agree button? I think it wasn't long ago. Yes. So because you do that wherever you are, you on transportation at your house, you do this routinely. And this is the major difference between the classic bureaucracy and algorithmic bureaucracy. It's really ubiquitous.
This is an example of a typical e-government initiative website, some portal from India. Well, you see, it requires cookies. From New Zealand, some local government initiative. Sorry, the clicker is not working. From Russia, from UK. Everywhere they require your data. And it's the main idea. They collect your data to serve you. Yes or no? Here you can see an example from the United States, Ashtabula County. Again, a local governmental initiative. And you see that you can use your Facebook account just to log in. The problem is that the interface, the very interface, is constructed of the same elements as online stores, personal blogs, and so on. So basically, you do not see the difference. If you are a user, if you are a customer, you are doing it automatically. Platforms for e-government, they are basically borrowing the ideas from e-commerce and from those websites which require user retention, user who is constantly involved into interaction and clickbait, you know, that little thing where you leave more clicks, you leave more data on this website. So here is what turns us into algorithmic citizens. Accept, fill in, well, and you see, this is the gatekeeper. Without this, you cannot even start using the governmental website. Without this, you cannot be a part of this service. You cannot, like, when you are you come to some governmental building, at least you can communicate. Here, you cannot.
And this is actually makes you routinely sign contracts. That's what many people, most users don't realize. You you do some legal action by doing that.
And here one more quote from the classics. The power of algorithmic bureaucracy is growing because actually the ubiquity, the probability that you give that consent, that you click on that button is really high. You do not go to some brick and mortar place. You just use your smartphone.
Yes, well, and this is another quite ironic thing that you have to prove that you are not an algorithm using an algorithm.
And actually, I asked one of the popular language models if it finds it's offensive, if it finds it's rude that humans have to prove that they are not robots. It doesn't. So from this point of view,
Surprise.
it's not a problem. And here we come to the problem of lack of empathy. There was a very interesting article by Sophia Renhorderts this year. It was published this year, and it gives us perspective on this routine bureaucratic action. In real life world, you have this emotional charge, this empathy before and after the action, before and after the actual service.
2 more minutes.
Here you don't have it. Okay, and
yeah, and what would be the alternatives? Yes, what would be the alternatives? Well, the extreme alternatives seem to be either to refuse using any services at all and keep doing that old school way, brick and mortar. Well, it's still possible to do that in some places, though it's becoming extinct. Or you have to just accept it, and you have to accept that you are now an algorithmic user, an algorithmic citizen, and this is new normal.
But we understand that it's a black or white fallacy. So there has to be some spectrum. There have to be some ways to create that feedback, like they do in the commercial platforms, for example, a rating or some kind of reviewing the service before you buy the product, before you start using the governmental website, before you are involved into this kind of relations. I really want to read these reviews. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna and Michal. And now we move on to next presenters, Nazam Laila and Adiba Asri. They come from University of London, and the title of their presentation is The Deconstruction of the Masculine Bias in Gendered AI Discourse.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to start with the presentation. Can we just move to the next slide, please?
So, yeah.
Do I control it or hello?
Yeah, I think that.
I don't think I can operate.
Oh, please share your screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay,
So now it
great.
is.
Yeah. So the question that we're asking in our research is that how does the masculine bias reproduce patriarchal norms and attitudes in the design and use of AI? So AI is a very important part of the existing Industrial Revolution 4, and the previous panelists already talked about different aspects of it. We're going to look at how the biases are created from this masculine normativity. And we think it's important because it will ensure a fair cyberspace for everyone. And since we have different kind of users who would be using the AI technology and are using them, it's important to include all of them in this AI discourse. So we are going to determine the existing inequalities, these gender-based inequalities in the AI discourse. Then we are going to analyze how or why they are happening with some feminist frameworks. So the first examples that I would like to talk about are the flawed representations. So by flawed representations, we refer to the sexist designs of the voice assistants. So those of you who are familiar with Alexa, Cortana, or Siri, you already know that when they were initially introduced, they only had the female voices or the female images of them. So it's because the producers, they thought that it would create a sense of comfort within the users, and a female assistant is more welcoming than a male assistant. That was the initial idea. So after a lot of protests from the gender or social scientists, they later gave them the diversity options, but it is easy to see that how these kind of biases could come to your mind while designing something as sensitive or crucial as AI. Later, I would like to give another example on the humanoids, like Sophia, the first robot citizen. She was created to be created in such a way so that she would look like the famous actress Audrey Hepburn, and Audrey Hepburn is quite famous for her beauty. But at the same time, in the same year, another robot was created by Korea to participate in the Winter Olympic. It was called Taekwon 5. But they did not bother to give him a very, aesthetic feature, because his job was to play, and it was okay for him to look like a masculine ugly bot, because it would show his masculinity. Then I would like to discuss another example from Austria. So the sex bot industry is rising now, and the people who are creating them, they are trying to objectify the female body while designing them. So there was this incident in Austria where they were showcasing, one company was showcasing their produced sex bots, and it was a free exhibition. So there they noticed something very interesting. The male users who came to check out the products, they would exchange pleasure for violence, which means the producers were expecting that they would get connected with the robots on an emotional basis, because sex bots are not only about the machines, they also had to induce some kind of emotion so that they could connect with the users. But the users, since they did not have to pay for them, they ended up groping the robots and also destroying them while molesting them sexually. So the producer who created it, the engineer, he was shocked, and he thought that it's only because they did not have to pay for it, they abused the robots. But it goes way deeper than that, because it is this inherent masculine biases which allowed them to exchange pleasure for violence. So we can see the reflection of it again in 2022 when this new AI app, Lensa, is getting very popular. So aside from ChatGPT, people are getting crazy about this app because it is one of those AI products which would translate the text to the images. And one user mentioned that this AI app translated her text-based images to something very sexist. Because she's coming from this Asian background, her pictures were turned into some very disturbing, objectified pictures, because the bot picked up the term that she is Asian, and the bot created some images of her which are associated with some of these anime characters or some of these characters from the hentai porn. So she found that very offensive. And another example would be the virtual realities, which were created by Horizon. One of the good example of this virtual reality would be Horizon was created by Meta, and the Quiver, the VR game. So female users mentioned that as soon as this platform was launched, when they entered that arena, they were sexually harassed by the masculine avatars. So it's not only about the platforms, it's about the psychology that comes with the masculine biases. Yeah, so next I would like to talk about the data that are currently available online. So most of them are gendered, and a good example would be how the Google Translate AI translates some of these data to gendered products. So here is a screenshot of a Google Translate text where some Bengali lines have been translated to some English lines, and you could see that the pronouns, like a good number of pronouns that have been translated, their gender. So for example, some of the care work related examples like cooking, cleaning, or doing feminine works have been associated with the female pronouns as opposed to the masculine or male pronouns, which have been associated with reading or being intelligent or being confident. The same example could be found in another text-based screenshot. This one has been taken from this Hungarian language. So the user who used this Hungarian language in Google Translate, Google's translator, they also gave the same complaint that the language is translated into a gendered language when it is used by the Google Translate AI. The other example would be how the AI surveillance system is being used by some political bodies. So recently, I think we are all aware of what's happening in Iran in terms of the death of Mahsa Amini. So the Iranian government already mentioned that they have been using this facial recognition technology for moral policing. They have been using AI to determine which women do not wear hijab properly or wear too much makeup to provoke to present themselves in a provocative manner. So to fight this government app, a group of young Iranians, computer scientists have come up with a counter app called Geisha. So this app's duty is to show the users which ways they should take to avoid the Iranian police, moral policies, so that they do not have to be harassed by them. But I would argue with the feminist scholarly lens that it still is not the proper solution to the masculine biases which are being used to treat the female body as a place of political ground. Yeah, so another example would be, and it's not really an example, it's something we are arguing that why these gender data are currently existing in the tech industry. It's because the representation of female workers are quite low compared to the male workers. If you look at the IT practitioners, you will see that most of them are males and it is highly male dominated. So, and the very few female IT entrepreneurs or the practitioners who currently exist in this industry, they often go through different kind of misogynistic practices. One good example would be Dame Stephanie Shirley, who is a very famous female IT entrepreneur, but she said that in her earlier days, she had to go through a huge turbulent time just because of her gender. She also had to change her name to Steve because she wanted to survive in this patriarchal IT industry. And the other example would be this technological determinism, which has been used in the medical IT industry. They have often ignored the gendered history or racial history of gender inequality. So case studies have been found which shows that the algorithms, the medical algorithms which have been created to determine the pregnancy risks of female patients, the African or Hispanic women are going through a lower success rate by using these medical technologies. So they are suffering from more problem compared to their Caucasian counterparts. So now if we try to analyze the problems with the feminist framework or feminist lens, this is what this is the summary we have to give you. That is this very famous feminist scholar, Simone de Beauvoir, analyzed this patriarchal attitude in this way, that historically women or the people of the second sex have been otherized by the male counterparts because the world has been designed or perceived through a male perspective. And because of this, women have been associated with specific gender roles. We can see that with the voice assistant or the humanoid or from the sex bot examples that I just discussed earlier. So these
just a reminder, 2 more minutes.
Okay, yeah, I will finish very quickly. So this has been even strengthened by the idea of using language. So the various uses of language have been used in such a way so that the images of women have become more objectified, and Teresa de Lauretis and Judith Butler both have argued for this. They have said this idea of associating language with gender has discriminated with women and the people of minorities more, and this act is called performativity. And because of this performativity, the women are bound to perform in a way that men or the patriarchal world wants them to act. So to fight this, we would suggest to use the intersectional lens while designing AI or while practicing anything related to IT. So an feminist intersectional lens would ask you to look at the power dynamics that exist while determining the audience's gender, race, class, disability, and everything. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we move on to our last panelist, Dunja Nešović. She comes from the Institute of Network Cultures. And the topic, the title of her presentation is Networking for You, the Algorithmically Mediated Network and Network Subject of TikTok. Dunja, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So yeah, today I'll be talking about the novel form of social networking that has been, if not instituted, then definitely solidified by TikTok, and specifically TikTok's main For You feed. And also I will pay some attention to a specific type of network subject that arises from this network formation. So Oh, perfect. So a short introduction on TikTok. TikTok is a video sharing social media platform that has been founded in 2016, but has experienced a boom in usership during 2020 on. TikTok was significant in instituting several paradigm shifts in social media, one of which pertained to its way of forwarding connection between different users. So namely the main content feed of TikTok, the one that I will be focusing on today, called For You, represents an infinite scroll of content uniquely curated by TikTok's recommendation algorithm for each user specifically. The results appearing on this content feed are based on the data the platform is provided with. And in this manner, users that haven't been previously following one another can be and are connected through algorithmic facilitation. So in some ways, talking about network on social media seems obsolete now, as Geert Loving already noticed in his essay, Requiem for the Network. Networks have been replaced by platforms, and even in social media literature, it's pretty hard to stumble on the abbreviation SNS, or social networking site. Caroline Levine would define networks as distinct forms, defined patterns of interconnection and exchange that organize social and aesthetic experience. And she also evokes Latour's conception of networks as useful because they allow us to track the contact points between actors as well as the routes that they take, enabling us with insight on how the social is produced. So even in this era of network decay on social media, it's useful to investigate the ties that still emerge and that can provide us with insight on who we are and how we're formed. So how do we perceive a network to generate on TikTok's For You feed? What are the mechanics of creating these connections? So as previously noted, the main way of forming connections between different users is facilitated by TikTok's recommendation system, or recommendation algorithm, to shorthandedly refer it as something. So recommendation algorithms are sorting instruments that work by mapping users' affinities and preferences in order to connect them with content or users they are assumed they want to interact with. As officially stated, the recommendation system of TikTok bases its preference mapping on the content the user already interacted with, the other users they follow, as well as the interests they provide through interaction with the search engine. So the results provided by recommendation algorithms are always dependent on the new data users provide. So being in a recursive loop with the users, these algorithms are being remade with every click and query, as Tarleton Gillespie would say. In this sense, the agency in directing the algorithm is, in the words of Taina Booker, distributed, since it is contingent on both human and non-human intervention. However, Booker would also say that algorithms represent platform strategic unknown, and they they always operate on a logic that is unintelligible to the users. For that reasons, users can be involved in certain negotiations or entanglements with algorithms that reflects the intentional actions aimed at directing the algorithm through the usership and data providing in order to receive the adequate results. Additionally, connections mediated or created on social media platforms are notably driven by profit-making interests, as José van Dijk also states in her outline of the notion of connectivity. So she differentiates between connectedness, that is purely creating connections, and connectivity, which is tied to the accumulation of economic capital on the part of the platforms, which is based through connections of users. So the platform acquires economic capital by scraping the behavioral and profiling data that emerges as a byproduct of the connections between users. So as the connections on TikTok are based on algorithmic mediation, they are also motored by popularity principle on the parts of content creators. So in order to facilitate as big of a network they can, the content creators will seek out to get as many connections as possible, involving them some certain entanglements and speculations around the algorithm. And in that sense, not only, of course, the platform will acquire certain economic capital or profit, but now that type of logic is also instituted within the user. So users are also looking to expand their profits by creating many connections. And in this sense, the nodes in these networks that generate are not of an equal weight. And these relationships are more based on a audience/performer type of relationship rather than being equal in that sense. So to conclude this part, the formation of connections between users represents an intersection of algorithmic patterning, conscious and unconscious user activity in facilitating the wanted results, as well as the underlying economic logic that governs the direction and proliferation of these connections. So if the recommendation algorithm facilitates the formation of the specific one-to-one connections, the For You feed provides a visual form of the individual network the end user is a part of, constituted through the infinite scroll of content that is both rhizomatic and fluid in this account. So borrowing the concepts from Deleuze and Guattari, the rhizomatic network of the For You feed is characterized by multiplicity, as well as by the principle of connection and heterogeneity. Much like the rhythm, once the network on For You feed encounters a break, a rupture, so both through the action of scrolling and with the change of data input, it starts all over again, creating new associations. Also, it always starts in the middle of things with no apparent beginning or an end, which is even more enforced by the infinite scroll affordance of the platform. The transient and ever-changing character of the For You feed reflects the rhizomatic short-term or anti-memory, which allows for the connections to be assembled, disassembled, and easily forgotten in an ever-changing movement of data flow and user activity. Apart from being rhizomatic, the form of this network is also fluid, as it changes shape through the endless stream of content provided by the For You feed. Drawing from Zygmunt Bauman's concept of liquidity as a state which is privileged in modernity, the For You feed, much like the fluid state, does not keep to any shape or a connection for longer than a moment. While scrolling through the For You feed, the end user is constantly changing the network by shifting from one connection to another through the infinite stream of content. Additionally, Bauman connects the melting of the solids into liquidity to the particular form of contemporary capitalism, which is reflected in the deconstruction of the economy as the basis of social life that provided the superstructure to the other realms of life. This led to the progressive untying of the economy from its traditional political, ethical, and cultural entanglements, and its flowing and mingling into other social forms, precisely as it did in the case of social media platforms, in which the economic logic intertwined with novel models of sociality and networking. So the liquid form of the For You feed made visible through the brittle connections, instant formation and deformation of the network and constant movement it implies also reflects the economic logic of fluidity that adheres to the connectivity principle of social media, which was previously discussed. So what happens to the user in this process? So the user and the network are in a constant process of mirroring and co-constituting each other. A useful concept at this point is John Cheney Lippold's algorithmic identity, which he defines as an identity that is based on data and statistics, made further intelligible by algorithms, which are in this way constituting a digital subject, as well as deconstructing it into individual pieces that fit the requested query of a certain database. So this type of identity is not essentialized. It might not even be in alignment with the subject's real life identity, but is constructed through a form of statistical stereotyping. Taking the individual users' algorithmic identities into account, TikTok's recommendation algorithm in this case not only provides the possibility for networking, given that the users will be probably connected with other users that share the same algorithmic identity. But as Gillespie notes, algorithms in this case provide a compelling technology of the self.
2 more minutes.
Thank you, I'm almost done. So yeah, which reflects the algorithmic identities back to the users through the connection it provides. So through creating a network by connecting users with other users that share the same algorithmic identity, the For You feed is also constituting the end user as a fragmented, multiple and unstable subject, which is always informed by the connections of the network it momentarily belongs to, as much as the formation of that network, or perhaps even these networks, is contingent on what that user is, at least in the algorithmic eyes of the platform. So to conclude, if we want to retain the concept of networking in this case, this network ends up being very unstable. It's very individualized as well, because on the one hand, it provides self-reflection back to the users, but also because of the platform architecture and interface design that disallows group formation. It is never actually performed, but it is actively preformed by both the algorithms and the users. It is potentially infinite, but is otherwise also very structured and limiting. And ultimately, it invites novel perspectives on contemporary social networking, in which the network can be abstracted. We can think about network as circuits of meaning, culture, or capital, but maybe less so as tangible connections between users. Thank you.
Thank you, Dunya. Thanks to all of the participants for the thought-provoking lectures and for respecting the time. So I have many questions, but before I start asking them, I will open the floor for questions from the audience. So please, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I found all of the lectures very, very interesting. And I have a lot of questions as well, but I'm just going to ask one. It's for the last presentation. I was wondering whether you are not maybe sometimes overstretching the term of algorithm a bit, because I had the feeling that sometimes you were actually more referring to the system as a whole rather than the algorithm. Because, for instance, when you said that the algorithm changes due to the feedback, I'm pretty sure that not the algorithm as in the way how things are calculated changes, but the underlying data and thus the prediction change. So I wonder how, so I would personally, if I would have given a similar talk, I would probably sometimes have used the term system or something like that when you were talking about an algorithm. I was just wondering about your perspective on that.
Oh yeah, thank you for noticing that. I mean, maybe it wasn't very noticeable. I was in the beginning, I told that I would be referring to the system shorthandedly as recommendation algorithm, because it's kind of like more or less like a colloquial term to address it. So I thought it would also be a bit more, I guess, comprehensible if I wouldn't switch between the terms throughout the talk. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for about the first talk for Milos. So thank you for the talk. It was very interesting, and a right amount of technical details, which I appreciate. And I just wanted to check if I understood your main conclusion correctly. So if I understood, you would recommend of removing the bias first, that strategy of removing the bias instead of optimizing for fairness directly. So
no, there's multiple. Yeah, I mean, there's one way to go. It is to remove bias in the data, if you mean in the data. But you want the resulting models that you use to be stripped out of bias any way you can. There's multiple ways to do it. Usually, the learning procedure that spits out the model is corrected, so it doesn't spit out the model that's biased. But that's just the engineering trick, how you go about doing it. The main thing is that you need to kind of define the bias before you try to optimize for it. And there's a play there that usually the whole literature devised a lot of ways how to do it, but they do it what's more simple for them, or sometimes what's more available for them, how to define what fair is. I think when into social scientists, there are much more advanced thoughts given in fairness than it's being used in machine learning to optimize for. And we're already spitting out models that's used in production with this kind of naive ways of how they optimize for fairness. And that's why I think this will not ever be bridged by engineers doing more things, but this multidisciplinary approach has to come into view.
Just a quick follow-up. Does that then relate to the discussion between, let's say, productive and discriminatory bias in terms of machine learning? And is that a topic which may be a bridge between engineering perspective and social science perspective?
Yeah, I see the roles separated, that engineers try to give ways to solve the problems, and social science is giving the goals, what needs to be solved. And of course, discussions are interesting always when between the two groups, but there are levels. There's no agreement in what fairness is, even within the community, right? So there's this huge gap there. But we are having production systems that work on some levels, so that's why it needs more. But as you said, there's sometimes even the equity kind of interpretation is okay. Sometimes you don't want it. So even the intersectionality is problematic, because sometimes you introduce, you equate the errors across groups, but then you have so many groups that you want to equate, it tends up to be non-practical. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions, comments? Yeah.
Thanks so much for very interesting talks. I had a question for you about the algorithmic bureaucracy. I was I thought very interesting, because I looked at this e-government platform, but more as a difficulty of people who have to access it. Like also because often the service is only online and you need to access, you need means, private means to access it. So I was wondering your views on if you also look at that. And also because you talked about the fact that these e-government platforms borrow from e-commerce, so that it requires user attention. And a way forward wouldn't be to create more media literacy, media awareness to the users, because it became such a huge civic topic. So that would be a responsibility from the governments. Thanks.
I'm going to comment on this. I'm going to comment on the second one. We were actually having the discussion, because we don't always agree. And here I said, well, we need more education to people to be aware of the issue, maybe some training, But at the same time, he would argue, well, that would just produce more algorithmic citizens. So there's just to, make the pattern more stable. So how do we really like engage people in thinking about what they are doing, what actions they are performing on there? So his idea was that review system, that is similar to the commercial websites where you can see what you are actually you're doing some legal action, and is it really worth it? So that would be his idea, and I would agree to that.
One more idea about what can be done to extend the capabilities of the users, of the algorithmic citizens, is actually designing the systems that can help, well, maybe based on the basis of AI recommendation systems like personal assistants dealing and explaining the user how, well, what the legal consequences are. Because right now we have huge imbalance when the governments and the authorities, they use this data and they use sophisticated software. They are capable of designing this black box, which is impossible to deconstruct, well, it's impossible to even to reach for the user, for the customer. And as for the first part of the question, of course, we are dealing with this ambiguity when from this perspective, it's really productive to utilize such systems. They are necessary. That's why they appear everywhere. But, well, this is the issue of ambiguity. For one citizen, it's great to have such service. For other citizens, it's just collecting data.
Yeah, you have to at the same time somehow handle the potential risks and handle potential consequences, and so basically that has huge benefits for the people, but at the same time they're changing them, they're making them follow the patterns, and we become the parts of the algorithm basically. So we need to be aware of that.
Any more questions or comments? Well, if there are none, I will have a couple of questions. First, for Nazam and Adiba. So at the end of your lecture, you mentioned something about performativity and Judith Butler, but I was just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, because as I understand performativity as the mode of social engagement is dependent upon the body, which is precarious, etc. And now in this virtual reality, how could we encapsulate this property in a proper manner, so to say? So if you could elaborate a little bit on this.
Thank you for the question. So yeah, by performativity, I meant that some of the roles that have been associated with this AI technology that is coming from these preconceived biases from the masculine sources. So Butler argues that even though sex is biological, gender is socially constructed, which means it has been assigned by the society, like what role should the females would play and the males would play. So in the AI, we can see the similar thing, that when you talk about the technologies, for example, the humanoids that I just mentioned, which reflects the facial features of Audrey Hepburn, or Type 1-5, which is the masculine robot, you are again reproducing the gender norms that have been created by the society. Women not necessarily has to be defined by their beauty, or male by their masculine presences. So when we look at AI, we need to think about intersectionality, and we need to think about how we can add the diversity option to the technologies so that it can be more inclusive for everyone. That's what we were recommending, basically.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions? Yeah.
It's great that we also can carry talk. My question is to the first speaker. Oh, now is it better now? Sorry. Well, The indicator was blinking, but I don't know. My question is to the first speaker. A very interesting topic of machine learning. It's really growing big right now. But as far as I know, machine learning is really good in doing simple things. And right now we are on this basic level when one task is maybe better than humans, but multiple tasks, complex tasks. But right now, the humanity, I would say, well, I probably can use this, this word, is integrating these small, relatively specific machine learning algorithms, tools, in many aspects of complex social processes, of complex social systems. So if we, for example, can measure the level of accuracy for particular task, for example, pattern recognition, face recognition. But when we deal with complex systems like smart city, for example, where these networks are multiple, these machine learning algorithms are really growing into something complex. What do you think? Are there ways of dealing with this level of complexity?
Yes, that's a good question. So we're definitely integrating all of these models into society. And you mentioned that the interaction is not only by processes run by humans and small part taken by machines. That's correct. And they can have interactions among themselves and build up the complex structure, if understood. That the decisions that they made kind of get amplified throughout the network when they making more choices and decisions that we think. Yes. Well, that's why we need to have this kind of to solve these smaller pieces before we interconnect them in a larger thing, right? So we need for example, you said we solve simple tasks. These tasks are not trivial that we solve, and they applied on a much larger scale. For example, for job application, you would say that humans in the loop, and there's always human that hires at the end. But the machine learning pre-selects candidates that go to a next round. And it can make all different biases on that level that you can measure, and you can say that there's a level of bias, but you cannot control unless you solve it within this phase. So later on, you cannot solve it in the second stage of interviews because you already made this kind of bias in the first. So I'm not sure if I understood. Making it more complex will be harder to spot how it's misbehaving, in a sense that these misalignments will amplify, definitely. And this is what I mentioned, what researchers from AI safety are concerned about. Because once this system becomes so complex that we cannot understand what they're doing or become superhuman, then it's kind of late to intervene, because we will not be capable to understand the effects so much. So, I mean, if I understood the question correctly. Yeah, Miles is within the social networking kind of places. Yes, that's great.
Are there any more questions? Comments, critiques? Okay, so if there is none, we can end this a little bit earlier because the lunch is served. So thanks to all the panelists. I really enjoyed all of the talks, and I enjoyed the discussion, and see you at the next panel. So give you a second.